Welcome to our exclusive YouTube premiere event brought to you by More Perfect Union. I'm Jake Harriman, the founder of More Perfect Union and your moderator for tonight's panel discussion. Now, we're here in Boise, Idaho tonight, sitting down with Mary Tobin, our Director of Brickyards, and Brian Von Herbulis, our Director of Rural Initiatives, to have an engaging conversation that promises to inspire, educate, and ignite actions that strengthen our communities and heals our country. Now, during the premiere, the MPU team and panel guests will be available to answer your questions in the live chat. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this thought-provoking discussion.
Well, welcome everybody. Appreciate everyone coming out on a Thursday night and spending time with us to learn about what this thing is called More Perfect Union. I see some friendly faces. I know some folks out here for sure. And again, I just want to say thanks for coming out. And for those that don't know me, I'm Brian Von Herbulis. I am a retired Marine Corps officer and a community member here in the Treasure Valley, and a staunch patriot and believer in the United States of America. If I were not, I wouldn't have spent a career's worth of time in the Marine Corps, where the majority of that was spent supporting combat operations in defense of this nation, and what I was tasked to do, and those that served alongside me were tasked to do. And in the aftermath of that career, and it's been a 10-year time period, when I left active duty, my eyes have been opened. I have new perspective. I have new requirements of me as a dad and a husband. And my goal is simply that we as Americans learn to appreciate what we have and continue to build a more perfect union so that our children and our grandchildren get to live a fulfilled and enriched life in this country and all the opportunity that it affords us. And so that simple concept is what brings me to being a part of this More Perfect Union team. So what is it? More Perfect Union is a veteran-led, but not veteran-exclusive, nationwide movement to strengthen communities, to heal divide, to simply build meaningful connections with people, to actually interface with one another, have conversations, strengthen communities by talking to each other instead of being polluted by information from these things, where we live in echo chambers. It's okay to have differing opinions. It's encouraged. Differing opinions make us stronger, make us better. We can actually learn from each other if we just ask hard questions, listen, and learn. And that's what More Perfect Union is about. It's about bringing people together to strengthen communities. It's about this right here. It's about gathering. It's about having a conversation. It's about having some food, breaking bread, keeping it simple, and then talking about things that are top of mind for us. Things that we want to do or see happen. We can talk about influencing change, and we can then figure out what action needs to be taken in order to do that. So that's what More Perfect Union is. That's what we're doing. We're scaling this around the country, and we're asking people to become a part of it. It's that simple. Take ownership of your community. As Americans, we have the amazing opportunity to be civically engaged. But that means we've got to be active. It means we actually have to do things, take action, be informed citizens, learn about who's running for the local city council positions or the mayor, figure out what their platforms are. Why does it matter? What do I want to believe in, and what do I believe in, and what's the why behind it all? So that we are building stronger, better, more informed communities and a citizenry that understands what's happening in and around us. And so we're going to bring people together like this all around the country, have conversations with people, bring in people of different minds, different mindset, different perspectives, and again, just allow conversations to happen so we can be informed and we can go on about building this more perfect union. So every organization starts with a good story, right? So tonight what you're going to hear is the story of the founder of More Perfect Union. Jake Harriman, who's here tonight, is somebody that surprisingly, in the small community of reconnaissance Marines, he and I worked in that community for a long time and never met in our time period in the service together. I've heard this guy's name for over 20 years, and we met last year in person for the first time. An amazing story. I've followed his path post his Marine Corps career. My daughter actually wrote a paper about the international nonprofit that Jake Harriman started called Nuru International that you'll hear about tonight. So he's had an impact on my family from afar. My daughter was fascinated by that work. And here we are today creating a movement and building this out together and scaling it around the country. So with that, I want to invite Jake Harriman up here to tell the story, how we got here, and what we're working towards today. Welcome to Idaho.
This is pretty amazing. Like I have had a chance to meet so many amazing people here tonight, and I actually feel like, how many here have been to a family reunion? Right? So you remember the weird, awkward second cousin that shows up and like, no, that's me. I feel like everybody in this room like has known one another for like years, and I'm like the guy that shows up and like, hey, who's Rando here in the corner, you know? So, but you all have been super welcoming, so thank you for the opportunity to come here. It's an honor to be here in this really special community that you all have built. I know Mission 43 is a really core component of this group, so thank you for the mission that you guys are doing here. We've got a couple other organizations here that are doing great work. Veterans for All Voters here in Idaho. You should get to know about their work as well in helping, really represent, getting folks out to vote and have their voice heard in our elections. It's pretty cool work. And so it's a special gathering. And I am humbled by the opportunity to be able to share our story. And as Vaughn said, every movement starts with a story. And if I can start something like this, trust me, anybody can get involved. I'm a country bumpkin from West Virginia. I'm the least likely person to kind of start anything. But I tell you what, this ride has been amazing. And I'm honored to share it with you. So my story, I grew up a little farm in West Virginia. Grew up in poverty. I didn't know it, though. My parents were awesome. Lived off the land, hunted for meat, grew everything we ate. It was a pretty great upbringing. Ended up going to the Naval Academy for undergrad. And when I graduated, I was commissioned in the Marine Corps. Yeah, I know. I say Naval Academy. All the West Pointers in here. Thank you. I was wondering where that was. Thank you.
Beat
Army.
Classmates,
Paul, back here. Had a great time there and ended up commissioned as a Marine Corps officer. Did time first in the infantry, and then a unit called Force Recon after that. And I did a few tours of combat in Iraq and a couple other places. And while I was in combat, as happens with many of us, things happen in combat. Stories are written in combat that you just can't unwrite, right? That transform our lives, change us, impact us forever. And there was one moment in particular that totally changed the trajectory in my life. We had, many of you probably remember in the early days of the Iraq War, we were one of the lead units of the Marine Corps, kind of going straight up through southern Iraq. We had just survived the first major contact in the war in a place called Nasiriyah, the Battle of Nasiriyah, where we'd been ambushed. We started taking heavy casualties. We were able to fight through the city, set up a defensive perimeter north of the city where we had to dig in and await resupply. And now, most of you in the room probably know the worst thing in combat is when you're sitting still and you're waiting. And southern Iraq at the time was one of the poorest places in the world. Saddam had been oppressing the population in the South. There was a real hunger problem. There was no access to healthcare education for the kids. And what had been happening as we moved through the South was the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad, while Saddam was pushing his Fedayeen soldiers south, and they were going hut to hut in these rural villages, coercing these poor farmers to fight us, essentially saying, look, your kids are starving right in front of you. We'll drop off a bag of maize or rice here every other week if you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here. And in the early days of the war, we were fighting these guys by the hundreds and thousands. And that kind of set the stage for this one really catalytic moment in my life. So we were dug in north of Nasiriyah, and I'll never forget, it was about 4:30 in the morning, almost 5 o'clock. I knew as the sun came up, they were going to start shooting at us again. So I got up out of my fighting hole, started walking the lines, check on my guys. And I looked up on the highway, this Highway 7 that we were set up on, and this little white car was racing toward our position from the north, which was odd because there were no cars on the highway at this point. And the enemy had just started using suicide bombing tactics. They'd pack explosives in the car, they'd drive them into our position, blow themselves up. So I thought this guy was a suicide bomber. So I grabbed 3 of my guys, we took off running toward this car to get it to stop. Finally, the car stopped about 50 meters out. The driver hops out, starts waving his arms frantically and running at me. So now I think this guy's strapped a bomb to himself. He's going to blow himself up. So I'm yelling at him in Arabic to get on the ground. He's not listening. And as I lift my weapon, I think I have to take this guy out. I look behind him, and this large black military truck roll up behind his little white car, and 6 guys in black jump out of the truck, run up to the car, and start shooting into the car. So this man stopped dead in his tracks, starts screaming, turns around, starts running back to the car. And that's when I realized, this guy was just one of those poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines of safety because he didn't want to fight. He was bringing his family to try to help save them. So I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, the bad guys, and I was running as fast as I could to try to save this guy's family, but by the time I got there, it was too late. I looked in the passenger's side. His wife had been shot in the face and in the chest. She was slumped over dead. Little baby in the back seat had her arm shot off, and she'd been shot in the head. And he was cradling the body of his little 5 or 6-year-old daughter who had been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood as she was trying to breathe. And for the first time in the war, everything slowed down for me, and I put myself in this guy's shoes. And I thought, I live in a world of choices in this country. Where do I want my kids to grow up? What do I want them to have for breakfast? Where do I want them to go to school? What were the choices this guy had this morning? He had nothing. He could watch his kids starve to death. He could strap a bomb to himself. He had nothing. And in that moment, I got really, really angry. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that the GPS coordinates of a person's birthplace dictate what choices they have in this world. And that was the beginning of a really powerful awakening among the guys and I in my unit. And we began to see what we thought was a critical gap in our national security strategy to eventually fight the groups we were fighting, groups like Al-Qaeda and eventually even ISIS. You see, we were going out there every night doing these snatch and grab, capture, kill missions, but the movements kept growing. And we found out that they were preying on the vulnerable populations in these extremely poor areas. And the aid groups couldn't reach these folks because it was too dangerous. So we hatched this crazy idea. We thought, well, what if we could take, knuckle draggers like us that know combat, combine them with some frontline development professionals who know how to eradicate poverty with sustainable solutions, and we could form these composite teams that can embed in these dangerous places, what we call these gray zones, and we could live there for 5 to 7 years, work with local leaders to eradicate poverty and stop the spread of these groups, build these resilience corridors to stop the spread of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So that was the idea we hatched, and we thought, well, who's dumb enough to do it? And they all pointed at me. So when my time was up in the Marine Corps, I decided I wanted to take on this mission. So I transitioned out and ended up going to business school. I went to Stanford Graduate School of Business. To this day, I still don't know how I got in. I think they had a quota for a West Virginia kid who was a Marine. I think you had to like eat crayons to get in, and that was, I was very good at that. And so, yeah, got in, and a pretty amazing thing happened when I went to school. I had over 30 of my classmates got involved, helped me build out the model for how to do this. About 6 of my faculty there provided seed funding and mentorship, advice, and by the time I graduated, we raised about $500,000 to get started. So I graduated in June of '08, and then in September, packed my bags and moved to a really remote area in Africa off the grid where ISIS had begun spreading. And essentially for the next 7.5 years, I lived in these villages, building and testing this thing to try to get it off the ground. And I made every possible mistake in the book as a leader, but I had an incredible team. And my team started having a really amazing impact. Over the next 7 years, we were able to empower about 250,000 people out of extreme poverty. We built a global team of 230 staff, and we raised about $60 million to get us there. And so about that time, as we were growing so quickly, we started attracting some attention back in the US, which is where the stories start shifting to be a little more relevant to our conversation here tonight. President Bush and President Clinton were starting this new program that they were calling the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. It was a new program where they were trying to find some emerging leaders working on national and international issues, and they wanted to bring them in to kind of expand and scale up their ideas. So they invited me to participate, but to do that, I had to move back to the US. And I hadn't lived here in 15 years. I was always deployed downrange as a Marine in combat, and then I lived in these villages for 7, almost 8 years with Nuru, my organization. So I decided to come back for this thing, and so when I moved home, I was shocked by what I saw. I did not recognize the country that I left to fight for in 2001. There was this bitter fear and hatred that was ripping apart the country and our communities. There was this crazy extremism that had crept into politics and people just grandstanding on social media, and the American people had no voice anymore. And I got really sad. You know, all of us had been downrange fighting for the idea of America against our enemies, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, only to realize it wasn't going to be them that beat us. It was going to be us. And then I got really pissed off. And I thought, I didn't watch a bunch of my buddies pay the ultimate sacrifice to come home here and watch us tear ourselves apart while our enemies sit on the sidelines laughing and waiting. I thought I had to do something here at home. But what do you do, right? I mean, again, I'm this knucklehead Marine guy. Like, what am I going to do to try to fix politics and divisiveness in the country? But I'm pretty stubborn, and I decided I had to do something. I had some mentors that said, "Hey, you should run for office." And I thought, that is a terrible idea. I'm not going to do that. There's got to be something else I can do. So I started talking to some of my donors who've been backing me for about 8 years. They said, "Look, we've got kids. We're really worried they're not going to have a democracy left to inherit. This is insane. We got to do something about this. We've been looking for something to get behind, put some capital behind to figure out a way to build out more of a center in our country, help our communities heal. And we've been trying to find an organization to get behind, but there's nothing really creating systemic change. And we saw you as this kind of weirdo outsider that we backed to have impact in the aid industry, and you didn't know what you were doing then either. So we thought, hey, why don't you take a crack at the political industry here in the country and see if we can make a difference here to build out the center." And I was pretty fired up. You know, I thought, hey, let's take a shot. So I spent about 4 months, nights and weekends, diving in to try to understand the problem and started to see what I thought was a true market gap. So I put together this 50-page strategy and sent that around a bunch of my mentors. I had like Jim Mattis and John Allen, President Bush, a few others said, "Hey, this is not bad, you should do this." So I put together a 12-month transition plan out of my organization that was called Nuru International. And I was able to hand off the reins in June of 2020 to the new CEO. And because I wanted to make sure they had enough time, I was really passionate about that mission, still am. I want to make sure it continued to scale. And by the way, I didn't have to worry. When I left, they started doing better than they were when I was there. So I think they just had to get rid of me. And then I stepped into this new entity to launch what became known as More Perfect Union, a veteran-led movement to help heal the divide in this country at this important moment. Now, we're going to talk a lot tonight about the real heroes in this organization that are Vaughn and Mary and Garrett and all of our foot soldiers all over the country that are building this thing out. and the power of what they are doing. And I will tell you this, though, is before we get into the details, I was so frustrated, like all of us are. We're all frustrated right now. There's a lot of insanity out there right now. All this hatred, all this tension, this is not who we are. This is not what America is. And if we don't step forward as citizens to solve this problem right now, we're going to lose what we all fought so hard for. We're going to lose this thing we all love. We can't wait for people in Washington to solve this problem. As you can see, it's a freaking goat rope in Washington, right? We got to do it ourselves. And we can do it ourselves. This is a government of, by, and for the people, and we, the people, have to be the ones who solve it. Okay? We want you tonight to join us in this movement. We've got thousands of people all over the country right now, and this is growing really quickly, but we need you to get involved. And we're going to talk more about why. So with that, I want to get into some of the details, and I want to invite up, when we started building this, I'm like, okay, well, I'm always the dumbest guy in the room when it comes to building my team, and I knew I had to bring in a real rock star to get the blocking and tackling going and building out this movement. So the first person I brought on board was a guy named Garrett Cathcart, who was already building a bunch of veteran organizations around the country. I actually tricked him into coming to work for me, which is a funny story. He should tell you sometime. I think he was drunk at the time when I asked him. And I said, hey, just sign this. It's fine. But that's right. Have another drink, everybody, at the bar back here. But more importantly, we needed a visionary leader who had a lot of community development experience in really tough places, who had experience in bringing people across divides to do good things for communities together at scale. And there was a woman who had been working in the veteran service organization community for a long time. She had an impeccable reputation. I did not think we could get her to come work with us, but somehow, again, there was another open bar, and her secret sauce was whiskey, so we just needed whiskey for her. And we got Mary Tobin to come on board. She is one of my personal heroes, and there was no one better to get into the blocking and tackling of building this thing out. So Mary, if you could, please share with everybody a couple things. First, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and what brought you into this movement. Why do you care? Why did you get involved? You could do anything. I mean, this woman could do anything. She could actually be running Washington right now, but she's not. She's here. I'd love to hear, why did you decide to do this? And then I'd love to get in, we'll talk a little bit about the details of what we're actually doing, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Von. Boise is beautiful. This is my first time being here. I have a confession to make. I'm Black. I don't know if you've noticed. I figured I'd come out as Black here. Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of my family and friends are like, "Why are you in Boise right now?" And I keep assuring them the steak is great, the whiskey's great, and the people are better. I've been treated with so much kindness, love, and respect. And I think the reason why I came into MPU, or More Perfect Union, is because of some of the same reasons why I'm falling in love with Boise. I am from the undisputed king of cities, ATL, Georgia. That is how I intro every single time I talk. The home of sweet tea and lemon pepper wings. I heard you all drink unsweetened tea here, and so I think you're a bunch of communists. I'm sorry. But I'm from the South, the Deep South, and I am the proud daughter of a civil rights activist. My mother helped desegregate lunch counters in Nashville, Tennessee. And John Lewis was the person who actually wrote my nomination to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Go Army! Yes.
Beat Army.
No comment.
See, you're not a part of this movement. And so I mention that because from an early age, it was instilled in me, when you see a problem, you see something unjust, or you see something that needs to be corrected, or a wrong that needs to be made right, you don't spend all your time complaining about it, you do something about it. And so I had this passion and this fire early on in life because I had that modeled in my own family. I also had modeled in my family or in my life from an early age was, despite the fact that I saw some people in my community in Georgia who they weren't exactly fond of me because of my race, I had more mentors and role models who did not look like me investing in me. So I'm in high school. I plan on going to a historically black college and university named Spelman College. That's where I'm going to go. My mother groomed me to go there. But then I get thrown into JRTC in high school. And in JRTC, I had a senior Army instructor by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas J. Burke. They called him Stilly-Eyed Burke. He was, you just imagine, his white hair, stilly blue eyes, white guy in the middle of black Atlanta. I'm just like, sir, you are not safe. But he would come every day to lead our JRTC program. And for a while, our JRTC program at Benjamin Elijah Mays High School in Atlanta was the top producer of graduates, black graduates, for all of the service academies. He had a secret sauce where he was developing leaders. So he knew we were smart, and he would make us go to SAT prep, and he would walk up and down the halls making sure we went to class. But he used to say to me all the time, Tobin, you can go to any college. You can get a good job. But if you go to the military, you can become a leader. Let's help you make a 4-year decision where you can become a leader and change the world. And I believed that man. I somehow believed him. And his belief in me, his investment in me, is what convinced me to go to West Point. So I'm growing up in the Deep South where I can see Klan rallies on any given weekend. But countering that narrative in my head that I'm not supposed to like white people is this white man and his wife and his kids who treat me like family, who believe in me. So I go to West Point, and I'm now believing that I can be General Patton. I'm just walking around. I got the stick, trying to lead people around West Point, and I'm believing that I can be whatever I want to be, and I'm making friends who don't look like me. I am serving with people who are not from my background, and it's countering every narrative that I grew up with, that I couldn't work with a certain group of people, that a certain group of people didn't like me, or they thought a certain way about me. And then I get to the military because 6 months after I graduated from West Point, I was in Baghdad, Iraq. And I'm leading a platoon of men. I'm the only woman in the unit. And they say to me, we don't care what equipment you have biologically. Can you shoot straight, ma'am? Because we got the enemy coming towards us. And slowly but surely, I began to see, with enough contact, engagement, connection, and bonding, that we could change the narrative around how we think about each other. So 10 years, 2 deployments, a medical retirement, and I'm now out back in the world, and I am seeing people say the exact opposite of my experiences. They're saying that because you are a different race than a person, you can't agree. You don't have anything in common. Because you're a different religion, because you might be a different sexual orientation, there is no commonality, and you are divided, and you should stay divided. That was not my experience. So after working a couple of jobs in the government and nonprofit, I had the greatest honor of my life of serving in an administration. So I served in the Biden-Harris administration as a senior advisor for wounded warrior, veteran, and military families. And while I was in that role, my job was to try and convince leaders all across the federal government that we should be working together. Y'all, I literally had better luck trying to convince Naval Academy graduates to sit down with me and have lunch than I had paid leaders who would come together voluntarily to help veterans. It frustrated me so bad, Jake. And it pissed me off, like it pissed you off, that you get paid to represent all of us, and you don't want to sit down and help the people who put their lives on the line for you. So when my good buddy Garrett approached me about this fandangled organization called More Perfect Union, who wants to save the democracy, I was like, yeah, okay. It really touched me because all I could think of were these leaders who got on TV every day saying that they represented America, but could not sit down with me for an hour to talk about how we can help those who sacrificed everything for this country. And so that's why I came. That's why I jumped ship and came to More Perfect Union, because we are crazy enough to believe that it doesn't have to be this way. We can work together. I may not agree with you on everything, but I can agree with you on something. And that something is enough to keep this country going. So that's why I came to More Perfect
I
Union.
love that, Mary. Thank you so much. And there was a bottle makers involved as well.
Yeah, just a little bit. He
There's
gave me
a
a
theme
bottle.
here. I
Yeah.
like it.
There's a theme, that's right.
Yeah.
Mary, talk a little bit about, so Mary, Mary's title is Director of Brickyards nationally for us. Now, many of you are probably thinking, like, Von talked a little bit about what is a brickyard. Could you explain a little bit, what are brickyards at More Perfect Union? Like, what do we actually do? How do we, what's our kind of special sauce and how we think about healing the divide in the country? What's so different about what we do? And what's the role of veterans?
Absolutely. So brickyards are a really cool way of saying chapters. And so currently we have 18 brickyards in 14 states all over the country. We have almost 10,000 members, and we have almost 50 leaders who we've trained. We have a fellowship every year at the University of Montana. 50 leaders who are working all across the country to have events similar to these, where we bring people together, mainly different groups of people, people who seemingly don't agree on certain issues, and we have conversations about the American dream. We have conversations about what people hope for in their communities, and then we convince those people with makers and some good food that they should come together and do service projects in their community. So we have 3 pillars: service, civics, and leadership. So we develop leaders, and we train them to have civic conversations, and we train them to lead their community through service projects. And a lot of those service projects we partner with local nonprofits. Our secret sauce is we bring the food, we bring the good drinks, we bring the conversations, and leaders who are courageous enough to lead these conversations. And then we work with organizations, much like many of those in this audience, and we bring volunteers and impassioned volunteers and leaders to your work. So our whole goal is to show communities that you are in fact stronger together. Veterans and people who are in public service already have a lot of experience talking to strangers and convincing them to do good things. And so we recruit them, train them, and then deploy them back out into their communities. And the idea is that, yes, do we want more people voting? Yes. Do we want more poll workers? Yes. Do we want more politicians who can reach across the aisle and work together? Yes. But if people won't even sit down and talk to each other anymore, we can't get there. If people think that just because I come from a different side of town that I should hate you, we can't get there. So at the core of who we are, we help people build relationships again. We help people talk to each other again. There's a hashtag out there that says we should disagree better. Yeah, I should be able to talk to you and disagree and not hate you when I leave your presence. And so that's what we're doing every single day. And we get to do it by starting our training at the University of Montana. So it's not a bad place to be for 5 days. And we bring leaders out from all over the country. We train them for 5 days, and then they go immediately into their communities. And for 12 months, they work on building their community stronger and healing some of those divides.
I love that. And could you talk a little bit about the role of veterans? A lot of veterans in this room today. Why veterans right now? I mean, obviously, 330 million people in this country, less than 1% are veterans. Why veterans? What's the role of veterans that they're playing in this movement?
Yeah, well, number one, veterans are trained literally with folks that they probably have nothing seemingly in common with. I went to basic training with guys from Boise, West Virginia, New York, Texas, you name it. People who did not look like me, people who grew up on farms, and I'm a city slicker, and people who just had many different experiences, but you were required. You wore the same uniform, you had the same mission, you failed if you didn't work together. Veterans already have that inside of them that, hey, just because I'm different than you doesn't mean I can't work with you. So that's one. Veterans already have that mindset. I think, secondly, we use veterans as leaders in this work because veterans, I think, for many of us, especially those of us who have been deployed, I mean, after you get shot at, I'm not afraid of much. Ma'am yelling at me at a bakery about my political leanings is not very scary if you survived Afghanistan or Baghdad. But in fact, it makes you kind of lean into it. Why? Because if you have been deployed, if you have ever raised your hand to serve this country, you understood that democracy is more than just voting. Democracy is more than just who we pull the lever for in November. It is a state of mind. It is a way of thinking. Democracy means that I respect each and every one of you and your right to live the way you want to live, your right to think the way you want to think, and hopefully your right to do so without me wanting harm to each of you. And I see veterans like carrying that spirit forward in each of their communities each and every day. And we are trying to attract our Peace Corps brothers and sisters, those who work every single day as community servants, our AmeriCorps brothers and sisters who do this work, because they have that same mindset too, that I can and will go into communities and connect to them. And I don't care where your background is from, we should be bringing our community together. So we recruit like-minded individuals. But I'll say that a lot of our leaders are now starting to be the spouses and children and military dependents, family dependents or family members of a lot of our veterans. So it's not just veterans, and Von said it. We're veteran-led, but we are not veteran-exclusive because we have a military spouse in Glen Rose, Texas, and she is a firecracker. And she has somehow gotten people to roast pigs for free, build houses. We had an event in Glen Rose, a couple hundred people came out. Somehow we had people who are interested in planning and knitting on one side. We got a pig in the middle, and then we have our Native American brothers and sisters on the other side. So it was a powwow on one side. It's like, don't stop believing in the middle, and people over here talking about knitting and planning. It was the craziest thing, but it is exactly what we do. That's who we are. And all of them, we shared pig here, talked about Native American history there, and learned how to plant watermelon. I don't know. It was amazing. And that's who we are. So we are not just veteran-led, we are veteran-inspired. If you believe that you have a responsibility for the future and the legacy of this country, that's why you join More Perfect Union.
I love that. And I think one of the things we like to talk about, too, is there's so many amazing men and women coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan right now. And some of them, as many of them you know, too, are feeling a little lost, right? And as veterans, we need purpose, we need meaning. It's core to who we are. And we need a new hill to take. Yeah. And like, what better hill to take right now in this moment than to help save American democracy here at home? Yeah. You know, we fought for it overseas, now we need to fight for it here at home. And so that's why veterans, that is why people who have served, like she said, it's not just veterans, anybody who has served this country and understands the cost of freedom. So as we began to grow, and Mary got things kicked off, and we're scaling this thing around with Garrett, and you know, everybody in the country seems to know who Garrett is, by the way. If you want to talk about, like, I was just talking to Mary about this, like, you guys know the Dos Equis guy, you know, the most interesting guy in the world? It's Garrett. I think he actually, if you want to have an interesting conversation, talk to this guy, but perfect guy to lead a movement. But as we were growing, well, we found ourselves in a lot of urban and peri-urban areas, and we had a massive gap in our model, and that was rural communities. You know, I grew up on a little farm on a mountaintop. A lot of us come from rural areas, and today in this country, a lot of rural communities don't have a voice. They feel like they've lost agency. And that was a big gap in our model. And so we started thinking about how do we scale. Man, a lot of organizations trying to do this work can't get into rural communities. So we started thinking about how do we scale into rural communities. We need a special kind of person who can get into these rural communities and really start scaling it out. And that's when we brought this guy on board. And most of you know this knucklehead. And I had the privilege of, I heard about Von forever. This guy's a legend in the recon community. I was pretty much afraid of him, and I'm not afraid of a lot of people. Von was
I'm
always
afraid of him too.
Yeah, I know. Von always had this like tough look on his face, and you couldn't get him to smile like ever. And
My
so
kids still say the same thing.
But I was honored when I started talking to Von about, the recon community is super small, so I vetted Von, pretty quickly. He had an amazing reputation, and I thought if we can get this guy on board, he has an amazing network up here in the Mountain West, and we wanted to start our rural initiatives in a place where we could scale it to a lot of high-impact rural communities, starting in the Mountain West, where a lot of kind of the soul and heartbeat of the country is. And we thought of no better guy to bring on board than Von. And when he said yes, I felt really humbled to have him join the team. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to be super relevant for you here tonight. I'd like for Von to talk about or maybe you guys call him Brian. We call him Von because
I keep everyone confused.
Talk a little bit about why rural community is so important in this moment for the country, and then what you're hoping to do here in Boise.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of people don't realize that 46 million people in this country, so about 15% of the country, live in rural communities. 46 million is a lot of people. And they do have a voice. They have chosen to live a certain way, many of them, or they have chosen to return to a way of life that they grew up in. So many of them grow up in agricultural communities, much like when you drive 20 minutes outside of Boise, Idaho. You're going to find yourself in rural communities throughout this state. Idaho remains one of the most rural states in the United States of America today, where agriculture is still reigning supreme as an industry. So people who choose to live outside of the urban spaces or peri-urban spaces, they still matter. They face some of the same challenges, but maybe in different ways. If you choose to live in urban spaces, you have access to commodities. You have access to a Starbucks. You have access to work. It's easier to get there. But if you choose to live in a rural community, your commute to work may be longer. It may be on the farm. The way you look at economic issues can be slightly different. And they have challenges, but as I travel around and I speak to these people in these rural communities, for them to express that they have needs, but they feel like they're never heard. They know that laws are created by people that live in urban spaces, that no one really cares about what's going on in their communities, but they still pay taxes, but they never see the fruit of their tax dollars come back to their rural communities. So they matter. There's 46 million of them that matter, and we need to give them a voice. We need to pay attention to them, because in many of those spaces and places, they create the food that we eat. They work hard to produce for us and for our economic interests around the country, for our economic interests internationally. A lot of trade comes from what's grown in this country in rural America. And we need to pay some respect to these people that plow the dirt, that grow the food, that work hard, but choose a simple, or what is perceived to be a simple lifestyle. If you've ever lived that way, you'll quickly realize there's nothing simple about it. It's hard work. You have a work ethic that is truly community oriented, because you can't get by without community support in many of these rural communities. So in a lot of ways, they set the stage for how we as Americans started out as a country and how we should look at maybe moving forward as a country and developing community-based relationship, working with each other, lending a helping hand when it's needed without a whole lot of ask. And oftentimes that's what you see in these smaller, rural, small town communities. And I met a lot of people in the Marine Corps, in my career there, that came from those communities. And they were oftentimes the people that I recruited to come to my recon or Marine Special Operations units, because I knew their work ethic. I knew they were hard as woodpecker lips. Like, they knew what hard work looked like. And I could count on them to put the energy, the effort, the time, the dedication, no matter who was there in the unit or where they came from. Those individuals that came from those rural, small town communities were always willing to step up, step into the fray, work hard, and show other people what hard work looked like. And so, as I look at this task today of spreading this word, creating community, going into these communities, this work is daunting. And there's a reason why not a lot of organizations step into that space. They don't know how to go into those spaces or places. And it reminds me a lot of the tasks that I had in places like Afghanistan. We're going to send you to places that nobody goes. We're going to ask you to bring people together from different tribes to work together. We're going to create this concept called village stability operations. And you're going to go live amongst the populace in the most remote or in perhaps the most hazardous places in Afghanistan and bring community together. An unbelievably daunting task. And nobody's shooting at me here in the United States of America. Yet. But it's just as daunting of a task to go into some of these communities. But the recipe is there. If you go in and you ask questions and you just shut up and listen, these people will tell you what they contend with, what they need, what their hopes are, what their dreams are for their kids, and how they hope their kids take over the farm. But it becomes more and more challenging every year for them to sustain that way of life. So they do have a voice, they do have needs, they do have wants, they do have hopes, they do have dreams. They just choose to live in the rural spaces around the country. So we're going into those spaces. We're going to go visit those people. We're going to create brickyard leaders that live in these communities, in these rural counties, that are willing to go in and have conversations with people. Are we going to get them to come into the urban spaces and sit down and have coffee at Starbucks? Probably not. That's the lofty goal, you know? Are we going to get there? Who knows? But having conversations with them, giving them agency, giving them a voice, and understanding what they contend with, and providing them support, but also letting them know that they are actually a beacon to a large degree of what right looks like. And we can share their example, their values, their small town mindset and values to other places and other people around the country, is what we aspire to do with these people from small town and rural communities moving forward.
Thanks, man. As you can tell, like Von and Mary have a powerful vision for what we're trying to do in the country. I mean, actually, if you just look here, this is America right here, right? I mean, this is what it looks like. This is the power of what we're trying to build. We're trying to do something special here, starting in Idaho. Our whole entire rural initiative, which will quickly scale up, is starting here. This is ground zero. And this is our quiet little launch party of beginning to gain a foothold here in the Mountain West. We all know that this is a pretty important year. You know, some of you might have heard there's an election in November. There's a lot of toxicity around that right now, a lot of nonsense on social media, the news, et cetera. But it's got a lot of people pretty heated around the country. Our mission is to go out across this country, gain footholds, and turn the temperature down. There is potential for violence, there's potential for instability, but this is America, you know, and we're better than that. And we as citizens can create hope for other people around this country, so we don't have to devolve into that. I've got 3 asks for you to consider tonight, okay? The first ask is, everybody see that little piece of paper on their, don't worry, I'm not gonna ask you for money. This is not a fundraising thing, okay? Look at that piece of paper, okay?
Your bank account's connected to this QR code.
Not true. I'd like for everybody to pull your phone out, scan that QR code, and just join the movement, okay? Sign up to be a part of what we're doing. That's our first ask, okay? Before you leave here, and ask all the questions that you want about this. Second is, if you're interested in becoming a Brickyard leader and you want to actually participate in our fellowship program, Mary, could you talk a little bit about our fellowship program coming up in Montana?
Absolutely. Our fellowship program, which is how we train our Brickyard leaders, the applications open on March 13th. March 13th, and they close a month later, so mid-April as well. That is an all-expense paid training opportunity in Missoula, Montana, which is now my second home, and you know if I'm saying that because I'm from Atlanta, that must mean it is an incredible place to be, where we bring our leaders out for 5 days, and we train them, we motivate and inspire them. We allow them to build up the skills they need to get to work immediately. We are searching for 15 of our next leaders to occupy that fellowship. And the majority of those spaces, we want them to be from our rural communities. So we are recruiting right now from places and spaces just like this. So if you know of leaders in rural communities, who are rock stars and believe in this work, this type of work, and want to get to work now, please have them apply now. Those seats fill up really quickly, but we get to work immediately. So I'm looking at all of you all to help me recruit our next group of leaders. And so we're going to go from 14 states to 30, and I need for y'all to be a part of that effort.
And you're going to see, if you follow us on LinkedIn or other social media, you're going to see those application announcements come out. Please spread the word. You guys you're all highly networked. Please spread the word about what we're trying to do so we can get some really high quality leaders. We need visionary leaders to sign up for this fellowship, because what we're trying to accomplish this year is going to be pretty daunting. The last ask I have is, I need 2 to 3 people tonight in this room to sign up to help Von build this in Boise. We need to start this movement in the Mountain West to launch our rural initiatives here, and he needs help. We need, all of you in this room are experienced, networked leaders. And we need a couple of you to step forward tonight to be the ones who are going to talk to Von and say, hey, you know what? I want to be a part of this. I want to help lead it. So this is a call to leaders tonight. And I would ask each of you to consider that here before you go home, okay? Thank you all very much for spending this time with us. We really appreciate it. So humble to be here. And we'll stick around and ask and talk with you and answer any questions you have. So thanks a lot, guys. Enjoy the food and some
Thanks,
drinks.
everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us from across the United States to tune into our discussion here in Boise, Idaho. Let's work together to heal the country by creating stronger communities. Become a Brickyard leader in your hometown by applying for the 2024 Annual Fellowship. Applications are now open, but we close on April 13th. The future of our country is in the hands of people who step into the arena. Now is your time.